Hello, everybody. Welcome back. If you are joining us live or you are following along, you'll know that we literally just recorded Galatians, and just the way travel schedule and everything worked out for me, that I get to do back-to-back recordings. So you might notice that the social media looks a little different, that the scheme of things looks a little different. And if you're just joining us, then hello, welcome for the first time. My name is Candace Lees Johnson. I am a certified transformational emotional intelligence personal leadership trainer and coach for adults and teenagers. And I've been a nurse for 11 years. I left my career in 2020 to pursue everything that I just shared. And I occasionally see patients for alternative and holistic cancer treatment options because chemotherapy is not the only way. In fact, definitely not the only cure that's available. Jesus is the cure. God is the cure. We know this from Deuteronomy. And chemotherapy and radiation are lots of poison. And why would we want to jump right to poisons and cutting people open when there are other options, curative options at that? Anyway, that is what I do for a living, and your support of this ministry helps me keep all of those costs down and publicizing this and all of that. So anyway, if you want to follow me on all of the social media, how to tithe, where to tithe to this ministry, all of that, you're going to find it in the show notes in the comments section below. And you want to like and subscribe, of course, because that helps me. Actually, not me. This is actually really nothing to do with me, but when we like and subscribe, the channel elevates, and so do revelations of the Lord. I feel like the Lord called me to build this ministry, to make these revelations and make these revelation videos. And honestly, at the point of recording, I don't know what he's doing with them. So I am simply in obeyment and in the process. And I don't exactly know what that is going to look like. So I'm excited to be here. We are going to go into the book of Ruth. And it's interesting about the book of Ruth because I realized that one of my very good friends, we were friends when I was in the New Age, she has a very opinionated experience of the Bible, that women have been cut out of the Bible. And I remember it feeling and experiencing something very similar. But when I realized that actually women are everywhere in the Bible, but it takes a trained eye to see it, and it takes a trained eye to notice it. And if we come at it from a self-righteous place, absolutely, there's no woman in the Bible, then that's what we're going to see. No women in the Bible. And I went in being willing to be wrong. And when I went in willing to be wrong, honestly, all I could see was several like compounding mentions of women and how God used women back then. He gave them property. He allowed them to have property. We learned that in, I believe it is also the book of Deuteronomy that we learned that in. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Totally okay if you do that. I'm pretty sure it's in 1 minute, please. The book of prayer points. It's not Joshua. Pretty sure it's not Joshua. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it's in either Numbers or Deuteronomy. We learned that women can inherit property. We also learn in the book of Judges, I believe it's the book of Judges, we learn that women bring prophecy to the nation. And there's just several other mentions of how the Lord is leading women. And at first glance, the book of Ruth, I'm kind of like, the Bible could have really done without the book of Ruth. It's not very long. In fact, I'm not even going to keep you very long today. It's just kind of, at first glance, it's like, well, I mean, we could have really done without this. We could have literally just started the next chapter in this series that we've been in the Bible, and just said, well, real quick, we could have gone to Samuel, First Samuel, and just said, well, here's how the line of King David continued through Ruth and Boaz, they had a baby, and the baby was the grandfather of David, the end. However, the writers of the Old Testament decided that there was going to be an entire book about a woman and a woman's faith and a woman's generosity and a woman's, it's the word I'm looking for that they used in the Bible Project. I actually really liked that. It wasn't just her generosity, it was it was her courage that she stood by her mother-in-law. So I'll give you the context, I'll give you the background of the story, and then I'll tell you what my biggest revelations were from. And it's going to be very similar to what we did in the book of, not Galatians, in the book of Judges, where I did a capsule talk. We're going to do something very similar this time around. So a woman by the name of Naomi, okay? Naomi has two sons and a husband, and her sons marry, and I believe they both marry Moabites. And I'm going to get into why that is necessary. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it. The Moabite line we know of, you may have remembered from back in one of the earlier books of the Bible. I believe it was Deuteronomy or Numbers or Leviticus. No, it was, y'all, I'm doing my best to remember these things because they really do matter, and I'm committed to committing them to memory. I believe it was in the book of Numbers. It is when there is, maybe it's Deuteronomy. Maybe it is Deuteronomy. So what happens is the Moabites realize that there's a group of people going through their land. And because of that, they hire this witch doctor, Balaam, which is interesting, sounds like Baal, right? It's even spelled that way. They hire him to essentially get rid of the Israelites. But what happens is all he can do is bless them because they have the covering of the Lord. And they really don't even know that this is happening, which is bananas. So the Moabites are the ones that hired this guy to do this. And it's in Numbers. I was right. It was in Numbers. So that's why the Moabite line is cursed. So the beginning of this story, and this is what I realized, this was the revelation that the Lord told me, is in the beginning of the book of Ruth, we learn that Ruth's husband and his sons, they die. So in the beginning, we start with, wow. And this is what I wrote in my own notes before I went and researched it, is I wrote, the Moabite line seems to have a curse of early aborted marriages. So the Lord is visiting this on the Moabite line, this curse. But what's interesting is we have the messianic line running through these people. Amazing. So what happens is Naomi, I'm having difficulty saying that name. Naomi takes her two daughters-in-law and says, I want to go back to my own land. And they had never been in that land before. They're Moabites. They were in the land of Moabite. So the woman Naomi, she wants to go back to her own land. And one daughter-in-law says, nope, not doing it. And the other says, I'm going to stay. I'm going to go with you. And this woman's name is Ruth. So now what we have is the unfolding of a story. And I'll tell you that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to share with you like the context of the context, which is there is a redemption, okay, the word redemption, a redeeming, if you will, interplay of how God is at work even in the mundane things. Also, how a cursed family, a cursed tribe still ushers the line of King David, aka the Messianic line. And number two, wait, that was number two. Just kidding. That was number two. Okay. Now, what happens in this story is the daughter-in-law, Ruth, goes back with Naomi. And Naomi says, Ruth, go into this field and collect barley. And Ruth begins to work into the field. And then a man by the name of Boaz comes upon Ruth. He's heard of the goodness that he's done that Ruth has done by following back her mother-in-law. And he's heard of her good news. God moved ahead of Ruth on her behalf. And then Ruth goes back to Naomi and says, hey, this was the field that I went into today. And Naomi says, I know that field. Boaz owns that field, and he is a kinsman of mine, which is good to hear. Because what we also learn in, I'm really, really, really jumping ahead. I'm going to pause for a minute. No, I'm not. I'm just going to keep going. What we learn is in Numbers 36, verses 3 through 4, chapter 4, verse 3 through 4, again, Numbers 36, chapter 4, verse 3 through 4, we have an example of women owning and facilitating property. Naomi, because of her husband dying and then her sons dying, she inherited all of this property. It needs to have an owner. And in order to do that, she must keep the land in her name. And so she comes back to her own land and she changes her name to bitterness. She changes her name to Mara, which that's like weird. Why would you change your name? She's like angry at God. She changes her name. It's kind of weird to me, which, like, why would you go about changing your name? You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me in the New Age, all of these people started naming themselves Sally Sunshine and Shiva Yanda and Jenna Glorious, like all these random names. That's not your name. That's not your name. I don't know what spirit gave you some name like that, but that's not the name that your parents gave you. That's not your real name. Did God tell you to change your name or did you change your name on your own accord? That's the question. If you changed your name on your own accord, I would be curious. It's just, and if you are watching this and you are like fresh out of the new age, maybe you're not even out of the new age, you're just exploring, you just happen to come across the book of Ruth today, is like, hey, I'm not in any way, shape, or form judging you. I also changed my name at some point. Okay. And it wasn't of God. I would question, since you know that it wasn't of God, what spirits did that overwhelming urge to change your name come from? Because you yourself are not powerful enough for that. You can receive information of spirits and elements according to the Bible, but we are not powerful enough to create them our own because we know that there is something bigger than us out there. Okay, anyway, so Mara, she's under some who knows what because, I mean, her family was cursed, right? We know that. And then Ruth knows all what's up. So she presents herself to Boaz in a professional way, if you will, in a biblical kind of way. She doesn't be like, yo, here I am, you know, she didn't show up all unbiblical, if you will. And Boaz realizes what's going on. And he says, you know what? Your land and you get to be married. But he says then, I have a next of kin. This is chapter 4, verses 14 through 15. This is the capsule study that I wanted to go through. Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Different. Nope, that's not right. That's not right. In chapter 3, verse 13, we have Boaz saying, I understand your request, and I do have another kinsman, and he is closer to Naomi, so he would actually be the rightful heir of all of this land. So then Boaz goes to his kinsman, the kinsman in question here, and says, hey, there's this land that you get to inherit, and you can have this woman, Ruth. And the man goes, no, I don't take no Moabites. They are dirty. They're unclean. Don't you know the scripture? Essentially, they're not good. I don't want any part of that. So because of his sin, Boaz marries Ruth. And then they have a baby. And it's the messianic line. And that baby is the grandfather of David. Now, let's look at some other things. That, by the way, that is one specific example of God using one man's sin of refusing custom of the day to keep the line of David holy. I also feel, and I mentioned this already, that God moved ahead of Ruth by softening Boaz's heart to her by word of mouth. Now, when we look at chapter 4, this is like our last point, y'all. When we look at chapter 4, verses 14 through 15, blessed be the Lord which hath not left thee this day. This is what Ruth says to Naomi. Blessed be the Lord which had not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life and a nourisher of thine old age. Now she is speaking to Ruth and saying, this baby is your kinsman now, Naomi. It's going to continue your line. But what I also heard in that, I'm going to read it again, and I'm curious what else that you hear. Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life and a nourisher of thine old age. Who do you know is a nourisher after we die, aka old age? Who restores our life and whose name is famous in Israel? Well, I mean, he's famous in Israel, whether they believe in him or not. Jesus. I believe that that verse is a foretelling of Jesus. I didn't read that anywhere. So, again, don't trust me. Fact check. You want to go back and fact check because I plug in devices in, y'all. That was just a revelation that came to me. Another revelation that came to me was when we allow ourselves to have our eyes open to how the Lord uses women and uses other people in the Bible, not just women, but I'm a woman, so I can more empathize with that. I'm curious then if our eyes are open to how the Lord is using people that we otherwise would not have realized, then would we not then want to pray of how the Lord will open our eyes to how he wants to use us? So, Lord, I pray that the Lord uses us and that we have the eyes to see and the ears to hear how the Lord is using us, because we may not know, we may not understand. In fact, we may have isolated ourselves into these jobs or these careers or these paths that we're like waiting on something, or we're not making moves, or we're not doing anything like that. But like, Lord, you're just waiting for us to make a move so that you can use us. And really, we're standing still. We had been, quote unquote, waiting for you, and you are waiting on us to make that move, Lord, so that we can be in the full trust of faith for the hope of righteousness, as mentioned in Galatians. And then you will use us. And I pray that for everyone who watches this, in Jesus's name, amen and amen. So that is your homework. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel so that more people can receive these revelations. And also share in the comments what you receive from that prayer, the prayer of what and how is the Lord wanting to use you. in this time. I guarantee you're going to find something that you've never seen before, and share it in the comments because I do truly want to hear back from you on how these revelations are supporting you. And remember, don't trust me, trust the Bible. Bye.